The grocery reset nobody wants to talk about. There was a time when people could walk into a grocery store with $100 and leave feeling prepared. A full cart, a stocked freezer, a pantry that looks stable. Now, people pause in front of shelves longer than they used to. Not because they're comparing brands. Because they're calculating. They're putting things back. Skipping items they once bought without thinking. Stretching meals. Choosing what can wait. And what's happening right now is bigger than normal inflation. This is not a temporary surge that disappears after one good harvest or one election cycle. What we're witnessing is a long-term reset in the cost of basic food. Some products may fluctuate slightly month to month. But many of the prices Americans remember from just a few years ago are not returning. Why? Because the systems behind these foods have changed. Droughts, aging farmland, shrinking livestock numbers, packaging shortages, transportation costs, labor pressure, crop disease, bee decline, global supply disruptions. These aren't isolated problems anymore. They're layered together. And once higher costs become embedded into the supply chain, they rarely disappear completely. That's why today we're walking through 10 foods that used to feel affordable, but are quietly becoming permanent premium items. And more importantly, we'll talk about what practical households are doing right now to stay ahead while prices are still manageable. Because preparedness today doesn't look like panic. It looks like planning. Number 10, ground beef. If you only remember one item from this entire list, make it this one. Because ground beef tells the entire story of what's happening across American food systems. The U.S. cattle herd is now sitting at its lowest level in more than 7 decades. That isn't a headline designed to scare people. It's a measurable reality. For years, ranchers across the country dealt with brutal drought conditions that drove feed prices sky high. Keeping cattle became increasingly expensive. In many areas, ranchers simply couldn't afford to maintain large herds anymore. So they reduced them. And here's the part most shoppers never think about. You cannot rebuild cattle supply quickly. Even if ranchers started expanding aggressively tomorrow morning, it would still take years before consumers felt meaningful relief at grocery stores. A calf born today does not become market-ready beef overnight. The timeline stretches roughly 18 months to 2 years. That means today's shortage continues echoing forward. And meanwhile, costs keep piling up. Feed remains expensive. Transportation costs remain elevated. Labor costs continue climbing. Fuel affects every step from farm to processing plant to delivery truck. Every layer adds pressure. A local grocery manager told me recently that beef suppliers now send price adjustment notices so frequently that employees barely react anymore. It has become normal. Every few months another increase arrives. And most experts tracking cattle markets believe additional increases are still ahead. Now think about your own household. How often does ground beef appear in your meals? Tacos, chili, pasta, hamburgers, meatloaf, soups, casseroles. For millions of families, it's one of the core proteins that built affordable American cooking. But affordability is changing. That's why smart households are adjusting early instead of reacting later. One of the easiest ways to protect yourself from future increases is simple. Buy larger quantities when prices dip. Ground beef freezes extremely well. Vacuum sealing extends quality dramatically. Properly stored portions can hold for up to a year. That isn't hoarding. That's price locking. And another overlooked strategy. Shelf-stable protein backups. Canned beef. Canned stew meat. Freeze-dried meat products. Because when fresh beef becomes more volatile, having alternatives matters. The families that stay calm during price spikes are usually the families that prepared before the spike happened. And unfortunately, ground beef is only the beginning. Number 9, ground coffee. Coffee may be the most underestimated food inflation story in America. Because people notice the extra dollar at the coffee shop. But they rarely see what's happening behind the scenes. Coffee futures have surged dramatically over recent years. In some periods, wholesale prices nearly tripled. And here's what makes this especially important. Consumers still haven't absorbed the full increase yet. Large companies spent years trying to soften the blow. Some reduced package sizes. Some accepted thinner margins temporarily. Others slowly raised prices in stages. But there's a limit to how long companies can absorb pressure. Eventually the cost reaches the shopper. And America has one major vulnerability here. We grow almost no coffee domestically. The overwhelming majority comes from countries like Brazil and Colombia. Brazil alone represents roughly 40% of global coffee production. And severe weather disruptions there have hammered output repeatedly. Drought, frost, heat stress, crop instability. Coffee trees are not quick recovery crops. A damaged growing season can ripple forward for years because trees require time to mature and produce consistently again. This is why analysts continue warning that higher coffee prices may persist well beyond the next year. Now pause for a second. Imagine your normal routine without coffee. Morning coffee is more than caffeine. For many households, it's ritual, comfort, predictability. And when prices rise sharply on something used daily, families feel it immediately. A container that cost modestly just a few years ago now feels noticeably expensive. And premium roasts have become almost shocking in some stores. This is one area where preparation is surprisingly easy. Ground coffee stored in airtight containers away from heat and moisture can maintain quality for long periods. Whole beans vacuum sealed last even longer. Some families are now buying their favorite blends in larger quantities specifically because they know replacement costs will likely keep climbing. Here's another smart trick. Divide stored coffee into smaller sealed portions. That way you only expose a small amount to air each week rather than reopening an entire large supply repeatedly. And don't overlook instant coffee either. A lot of people dismiss it. But shelf life matters. Reliability matters. Having backup options matters. Especially when basic comfort items become luxury purchases faster than people expected. Number 8. Olive oil. A few years ago, olive oil felt ordinary. Now many Americans hesitate before placing a bottle in the cart. The difference is dramatic. What once cost under $10 can now run $20 or more depending on brand and quality. And unlike short-term grocery spikes, olive oil prices may stay elevated for a very long time. Why? Because olive trees cannot recover quickly. Spain and Italy dominate global olive oil production. Together they account for the majority of worldwide supply. But repeated drought seasons devastated output. Heat waves damaged yields. Water shortages reduced production. And here's the crucial detail. Olive trees require years, sometimes decades, to fully mature and produce meaningful harvests. You cannot simply replace lost production in a single season. That means shortages and elevated pricing can linger far longer than consumers expect. But olive oil matters for another reason most people overlook completely. Nutrition. A pantry full of rice, pasta, beans, oats, and canned foods may contain calories. But calories alone are not enough. The body requires dietary fat to absorb vitamins A, D, E, and K. Without adequate fat intake, important nutrients become difficult to utilize properly. That makes cooking oils far more important than many preparedness discussions acknowledge. One nutrition expert explained it perfectly. A pantry without fats is incomplete, no matter how many calories it contains. That changes how you look at olive oil. It's not just salad dressing. It's nutritional infrastructure. Now here's where strategy matters. High-quality olive oil stored in dark glass bottles away from heat and sunlight can last surprisingly long. Many families are now purchasing extra bottles specifically because they recognize the trend line. And another practical move. Use less expensive oils for high-heat cooking while reserving olive oil for finishing meals, dressings, and flavor-focused dishes. Stretching premium ingredients intentionally is becoming a modern grocery survival skill. Because the era of casually replacing expensive staples without thinking may already be behind us. Number 7. Chocolate and cocoa products. This one surprised almost everyone watching commodity markets. Cocoa prices reached levels not seen in decades. And the reason goes deeper than simple demand. West Africa produces the majority of the world's cocoa supply. Countries there have faced severe agricultural pressure simultaneously. Disease, aging trees, weather disruptions, lower yields. The result: global cocoa harvests tightened dramatically. Manufacturers responded the way companies usually do. Smaller bars, less cocoa, higher prices. That's why many consumers feel like chocolate somehow costs more and disappears faster at the same time. Because it does. But there's another side to this story people rarely discuss. Morale. During stressful periods, familiar comfort foods carry enormous psychological value. Families don't just eat for nutrition. They eat for emotional stability. A small square of chocolate, a dessert after dinner, a treat during a difficult week. Those things matter more than people realize. One mother described a week-long power outage where a stash of chocolate became the one thing her children looked forward to every evening. That emotional normalcy matters, especially during uncertainty. And from a preparedness standpoint, dark chocolate has advantages many people never consider. High cocoa chocolate stores relatively well. It contains calories, minerals, energy. Stored properly away from heat and light, quality dark chocolate can last a very long time. Cocoa powder also deserves attention. It stores exceptionally well in airtight containers and gives households flexibility for baking, desserts, and drinks. This category may sound less essential than rice or canned vegetables. But the households that think beyond pure survival usually recover emotionally much better during difficult stretches. Preparedness isn't only about enduring. It's about maintaining normal life as much as possible. And small comforts become far more valuable once they become expensive. Before we continue, take a moment and look around your own kitchen. What item have you quietly stopped buying as often because the price simply crossed a line? Most families have at least one now. And honestly, that shift says a lot about where the economy is heading. Number 6. Butter. Butter feels permanent. That's what makes this one dangerous. People assume it will always be available. Always affordable. Always sitting in refrigerated cases. Until suddenly it is. Dairy operations across the country continue facing rising costs from nearly every direction. Feed, fuel, labor, equipment, transportation, and butter production depends heavily on those systems functioning efficiently. But there's another hidden issue that surprised many industry watchers. Shelf-stable canned butter production in the United States is incredibly limited. Only a handful of producers operate at meaningful scale. When even one facility encounters disruption, the effects ripple quickly. That means consumers looking for long-term dairy storage options may face tighter availability and higher pricing moving forward. Fresh butter prices have already climbed steadily. And because butter is tied directly to dairy economics overall, relief may remain limited. Now think about what butter actually does in cooking. It transforms simple foods. Rice becomes richer. Bread becomes satisfying. Potatoes become comfort food. Stored grains become actual meals. Butter adds calories, flavor, and satiety all at once. There's a reason older generations viewed it as a kitchen essential rather than a luxury. And here's the practical advantage many people still overlook. Butter freezes extremely well. Buying multiple pounds during sales and storing them properly can stabilize household costs for months. Vacuum sealing helps preserve quality. Frozen butter can maintain excellent condition for extended periods. And if you ever find shelf-stable canned butter at a reasonable price, pay attention. Long shelf-life dairy products may become increasingly valuable as refrigeration-dependent foods continue climbing in price. Because the families who adapt early usually avoid the worst financial pressure later. Number 5. Cooking oil. Cooking oil may be one of the most underappreciated foods in the average pantry. Until prices exploded. A gallon of vegetable oil that once felt inexpensive now costs dramatically more in many stores. And unlike some products where consumers can simply buy less, cooking oil performs essential functions in food preparation. The global cooking oil market absorbed shock after shock. Sunflower oil disruptions, palm oil export restrictions, trade complications, shipping costs, weather problems. Multiple systems tightened simultaneously. And because edible oils are foundational ingredients in enormous portions of the food industry, increases spread everywhere. Fried foods, packaged foods, restaurant pricing, snack products, bakery items, everything feels the impact. But from a preparedness perspective, cooking oil has another major advantage. Calorie density. 1 gallon contains enormous caloric value relative to cost. In difficult financial periods, calorie efficiency matters. And nutritionally, fats remain essential for vitamin absorption and overall dietary balance. This is why experienced food storage planners never ignore oils. Now here's the key. Rotation. Cooking oil should not simply sit untouched for years. The smartest households maintain a rolling supply. Use older containers first. Replace them steadily. Keep fresh inventory moving through the kitchen naturally. That approach prevents waste while maintaining stability. And another overlooked option: coconut oil. It stores longer at room temperature than many people realize. And it offers flexibility for cooking, baking, and emergency calorie support. At first glance, cooking oil seems boring. But boring pantry items are often the ones households miss most once prices surge. Number 4. Canned tomatoes and tomato products. This next one reveals how fragile concentrated food systems really are. Nearly all processed tomato products in the United States originate from one primary region: California's Central Valley. That level of concentration creates vulnerability. Because when one region experiences pressure, the entire country feels it. And California has faced repeated pressure: drought, water restrictions, labor shortages, rising production costs. Now add higher packaging expenses for steel and aluminum cans. Suddenly, even basic tomato products become more expensive to produce and distribute. And manufacturers often cut low-margin items first, which means certain tomato products can disappear unexpectedly from shelves. Now hear why tomatoes matter so much beyond price. Transformation. Rice and beans alone sustain people. Tomatoes help turn them into meals. Pasta sauce, chili, soup, stews, casseroles. Tomatoes create variety. Acidity, flavor depth. They prevent food fatigue. Anyone who has lived through prolonged disruptions understands how important meal variety becomes psychologically. People eventually stop wanting repetitive food, no matter how nutritious it is. That's why canned tomatoes remain one of the most valuable pantry multipliers available. And fortunately, they store extremely well. Diced tomatoes, tomato sauce, tomato paste, whole peeled tomatoes. Stored in cool, dark environments, many maintain quality for years. Some households now buy cases instead of single cans specifically because they understand how quickly pricing can change. And honestly, that strategy makes sense. Because when one region supplies nearly everything, stability becomes fragile very quickly. Number 3. Sugar and sweeteners. Most people think sugar only matters for desserts. That's a mistake. Sugar has historically played a critical role in food preservation. Long before refrigeration, people relied on sugar to preserve fruit, jams, syrups, and shelf-stable foods. And even today, sugar remains one of the longest-lasting pantry staples available. Stored correctly in airtight conditions away from moisture, white sugar can last indefinitely. Not years. Indefinitely. That alone makes it strategically important. But pricing pressure here is intensifying. Weather disruptions continue affecting sugar-producing regions globally. Trade policies add additional costs. And higher cocoa pricing indirectly affects sweet product categories overall. Many analysts now expect sugar and sweets to remain one of the fastest rising grocery categories moving forward. And because sugar flows into countless processed foods, consumers often pay the increase indirectly without noticing immediately. Breakfast foods, baking mixes, candy, snacks, drinks, condiments. The impact spreads everywhere. Now here's the preparedness advantage. Sugar is simple to store. Large bags usually provide far better value than smaller packaging. Transferred into airtight food-safe containers or sealed storage bags, it can remain stable for decades. Some households even add bay leaves to storage containers as a natural deterrent for pantry pests. And while many people focus only on emergency foods, experienced planners understand something deeper. Ingredients matter. The ability to bake, preserve fruit, create comfort foods, sweeten oatmeal, make homemade sauces. Those capabilities become more important when grocery costs rise aggressively. Preparedness isn't just stockpiling finished products. It's maintaining flexibility. And sugar quietly supports more flexibility than people realize. Number 2, canned and frozen vegetables. This category may be one of the most important on the entire list. Because when people build emergency food supplies, they often focus heavily on calories. Rice, beans, pasta, oats. But nutrition gaps appear quickly without vegetables. Vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin K, minerals, fiber. These matter enormously during long periods of dependence on stored foods. And unfortunately, canned and frozen vegetable prices have climbed significantly. Multiple agricultural regions faced simultaneous pressure from drought, flooding, labor shortages, and rising operational costs. Processing facilities also faced staffing and transportation challenges. The result: higher prices and tighter availability. Now here's something surprising many consumers still don't realize. Frozen vegetables are often nutritionally superior to fresh produce shipped long distances. Why? Because many frozen vegetables are flash frozen shortly after harvest at peak ripeness. That process preserves nutrients remarkably well. Meanwhile, fresh produce can spend days traveling before reaching shelves. So frozen vegetables are not a downgrade. In many cases, they're an efficient nutritional strategy. And canned vegetables bring another advantage: long shelf life. That combination makes both categories extremely valuable. The smartest approach is balance. Maintain frozen rotation for everyday use. Build canned reserves for stability. Corn, green beans, peas, mixed vegetables, tomatoes, carrots. Variety matters nutritionally and psychologically. Because eventually people stop craving only calories. They crave normal meals. And households that maintain balanced food supplies tend to stay healthier physically and emotionally during difficult stretches. Before we reach number 1, there's something important to understand. Most Americans are still shopping as if grocery prices will eventually go back to normal. But what if this is the new normal? What if the lower prices people remember were actually the temporary phase? That possibility changes how families prepare. Because once you recognize certain costs are becoming permanent, buying patterns start changing immediately. And that brings us to the final item. Number 1, raw honey in large formats. Honey may be the single most extraordinary food storage product ever discovered. Archaeologists examining ancient tombs uncovered containers of honey thousands of years old that remained edible. Thousands of years. That level of shelf stability sounds impossible. But the science behind it is real. Honey naturally resists bacterial growth because of its extremely low moisture content and acidic environment. It also produces small amounts of hydrogen peroxide through natural enzymatic activity. The result is a food with essentially unmatched longevity. But honey's importance today goes far beyond shelf life. Bee populations have faced serious decline pressures for years. Pesticide exposure, disease, habitat loss, environmental stress. At the same time, regulators intensified scrutiny around imported honey adulteration after widespread concerns about fake diluted products entering markets. That combination tightened supply. And something interesting is happening now. Large format honey containers are becoming harder to find at good prices. Small jars may still appear plentiful, but bulk quantities increasingly disappear first. And from a preparedness standpoint, bulk honey makes far more sense. Honey substitutes easily in countless recipes. When sugar prices rise, households with honey reserves gain flexibility automatically. But there's another overlooked advantage. Morale. A spoonful of honey over oatmeal. Tea sweetened naturally. Homemade bread with honey. Simple comforts become powerful stabilizers during difficult periods. And honey also carries practical medicinal value. For generations, people used it to soothe coughs, calm sore throats, and support wound care. Modern research continues validating many of those traditional uses. Now here's the best storage approach. Glass containers. Cool dark storage. Minimal moisture exposure. And if honey crystallizes, that's normal. In fact, many people consider it evidence of authenticity. A gentle warm water bath restores liquid consistency easily. No spoilage. No waste. Just one of the most durable foods humans have ever known. Final thoughts. Look back at these 10 foods together. Ground beef. Ground coffee. Olive oil. Chocolate and cocoa. Butter. Cooking oil. Canned tomatoes. Sugar. Canned and frozen vegetables. Raw honey. Different products. Different industries. Different supply chains. Yet the pattern is identical. Long recovery timelines. Weather pressure. Labor shortages. Transportation costs. Agricultural decline. Packaging issues. Rising demand. And perhaps most importantly, very little evidence that old prices are coming back. But this is where calm preparation matters. You do not need to panic. You do not need to empty store shelves. You do not need to spend thousands of dollars overnight. Small, consistent action works. On each grocery trip, choose 2 or 3 items from this list. Buy slightly larger quantities. Rotate what you use. Store products properly. Build gradually. That approach creates stability without chaos. Because the households handling food inflation best right now are not necessarily the wealthiest. They're the ones paying attention early. And one more thing. Preparedness is no longer fringe behavior. It's becoming ordinary household management. People are learning to protect themselves from volatility the same way previous generations once did naturally. By storing wisely. Buying ahead. Reducing dependence on last-minute shopping. And understanding that modern supply chains are far less stable than they appear. The grocery store still looks full. But prices are already telling a different story. And the families who recognize that story now may avoid a lot of financial pressure later. If this conversation changed the way you look at your pantry, share it with someone who's been noticing grocery bills climbing faster every month. And pay attention over the next few weeks. Watch what happens to the prices of these exact foods. Because once you start noticing the pattern, it becomes impossible to ignore.